Hello everyone, thank you for joining me again and welcome to any new viewers. This is To The Point English with Ben. I'm Ben, and today we're looking at linking words or connectors or conjunctions. In fact, we're looking at alternatives to the three most common and basic linkers, but, because, and. Now, I could have titled this video, Don't Say and, but, and because, or Stop Saying and, but, and because, as I've seen in other YouTube videos, but that would be misleading because there's absolutely nothing wrong with those words. You can use them in your writings and your speaking, even more formal writing and for C2 level exams. They're absolutely fine used in the right context. But it's very useful to know some alternatives, not only to get more marks and impress the examiners, but also to avoid repetition. Now, it's highly likely, actually it's certain that you will already know some of these words, but it's very useful to know how to use them in context and when you can use them, in which register, because some of them are more informal, whereas others are more useful for more formal situations like writing essays or reports or proposals, etc. Okay, so first of all, we're going to look at alternatives to the conjunction because. So you all know how to use because. It's a conjunction that links ideas in a sentence, links clauses or phrases, and it's used to give a reason for something, to explain something. So the first alternative I have is due to or due to the fact that. So let's look at an example. The initiative failed due to the fact that it was poorly implemented. Or you could say the initiative failed due to poor implementation. Because what you need to remember about due to is that it modifies a noun. So if you don't use the fact that, which is the noun, the fact, then you need to use another noun in the sentence. In this case, it's implementation. So we have an adjective before the noun, but that doesn't affect the fact that due to is modifying the noun implementation. But when we use the fact that, then we can continue with a verb or a subject and a verb. Okay, moving on to the next alternative to because, and that is owing to. Owing to. Now we use owing to in a very similar way as due to. So let's look at an example. Owing to increased pollution levels, the city implemented stricter regulations. So as you can see, that's very similar to due to. In fact, you could say due to increased pollution levels, but in this case, we're using an alternative, which is owing to. And again, that really just means because of increased pollution levels, but it's a little bit more advanced and sophisticated. Let's look at another one now. On account of. On account of. Again, that means because of, but it's a little bit more formal, so we wouldn't use it so much in more colloquial or conversational situations. So again, the example. The park is closed at the moment on account of the strong winds. So I imagine this as an official notification, perhaps on the gate to the park. So it's informing the public that the park is closed because of. That's fine, but it's a little bit more formal to say on account of. And one more alternative to because, and that's since. Now, since can be used in more informal, conversational or colloquial contexts, as you'll see from this example. Since no one signed up for the course, it was cancelled. So again, it's a direct alternative to because. You could say because no one signed up to the course, or owing to the fact that no one signed up to the course, due to the fact that no one signed up to the course, or on account of no one signing up for the course. These are all basically expressing the same idea, but now you have a few more alternatives for different contexts. Let's move on to but now, some alternatives to but. Now, of course, you know that but is used to express contrast, and it's a conjunction to link clauses or ideas within a sentence. And I want you to pay particular attention to the punctuation in these examples because I've noticed a lot of students preparing for the Cambridge English exams lose marks in the organisation criterion because they don't use the right punctuation. So let's look at the first one, which is yet. So we can use yet as an alternative to but. So the first example, the storyline is rather far-fetched, yet the book is incredibly gripping. Okay, so we're really emphasizing a contrast here. I've started with a negative point of view on the book. It's rather far-fetched, but then I'm presenting quite a surprising contrast. It's like almost like in spite of this fact, or simply but, the book is incredibly gripping. Now, if you're not sure of the meaning of the words gripping and far-fetched, I'll link to some old videos I made where I explain some advanced vocabulary to describe books and films. But moving on to the next alternative to but, and this one's very simple. It's however, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. It's used to express contrast. But an important difference to but is that we usually use however to start a sentence. So although we're linking ideas in different sentences. Okay, so let's look at the example. Your essay was well written. However, better punctuation would improve overall readability. So again, expressing this contrast, but note that after however, you need a comma. However is an introductory word, and after introductory words and phrases, you should add a comma. So moving on to the next two alternatives, we have nevertheless and nonetheless. Now these basically have the same meaning, so they're interchangeable, but as I said, it's always useful to have more options so you don't repeat vocabulary in your writings. And nevertheless and nonetheless are used in a very similar way to however. So let's look at the examples. She prepared meticulously for the exam. Nevertheless, she failed by 1 mark. Or nonetheless, she failed by 1 mark. Okay, a couple more alternatives to but now. We have although and even though. Again, these phrases basically express the same idea. So we can use them interchangeably in most contexts. So let's look at the example. Although the film is long, there's never a dull moment. Or even though the film is long, there's never a dull moment. Even though is a little bit more emphatic than although. Note here the comma after long, that's important. And also note that although these words can be used as alternatives to but, they're used in a different way, so in a different position in the sentence, because if we use but in this same sentence or expressing the same idea, it would go in the middle. So we could say the film is long, but there's never a dull moment. Okay, one more alternative to but, and this one's a little bit different because you may argue that it's not really a synonym of but. Maybe that's right, but it can be used in the similar contexts and express the same idea. And it's whereas, and we use whereas to really emphasize direct contrast between two things in the same sentence. So the example, I like rock music, whereas my girlfriend prefers pop. Again, you could say, I like rock music, but my girlfriend prefers pop. But this is a little bit more emphasizing the direct contrast. Okay, moving on to and now, which is a conjunction or a linking word or a connector, which we use to give more information, to add information, of course. As you know very well, it's one of the most basic words in the English language. But let's look at some alternatives. And the first one being as well as. So again, often when we look at these alternatives, we use them to add a little bit more emphasis. And that's what as well as does. So let's look at the example. The aim of this report is to identify areas which should be improved, as well as give recommendations for future projects. So again, we could use and there and give recommendations for future projects, but that doesn't quite give the same idea or the same emphasis. And as you can see, this is from a report, so a really useful phrase to use in those kinds of contexts, but also can be used in more informal contexts. It's quite a versatile phrase. But be careful when you use the phrase as well as, because in some contexts, it can create a certain level of ambiguity. For example, look at this sentence. Isabel speaks French as well as Spanish. So what do you think I'm saying there? Am I saying that Isabel speaks French and Spanish? Or am I suggesting that Isabel speaks French to the same level as Spanish? So her French and Spanish are at exactly the same level. Well, it's not particularly clear. Context usually helps, and I would guess that in this case, because we're talking about language levels and it's very unlikely that she would have exactly the same level, I would just say that the speaker is using this as an alternative to and, but you can see that sometimes you need to be a little bit careful. Okay, let's look at the next alternative. In fact, we're looking at 3 alternatives, which are in addition, furthermore, and moreover. I'm putting these together because they basically have the same meaning and are used with the same punctuation. Cycling is a great way to keep fit. Furthermore, it's better for the environment than driving a car. Or in addition, it's better for the environment than driving a car, or moreover, it's better for the environment than driving a car. So again, notice that although we're linking ideas, we have 2 sentences here. So these words start sentences and should be followed by a comma because they are introductory words and phrases. Now, those options are great for more formal situations, like your writings, your more formal writings, but this next option is the opposite. It's still an alternative to and, but it's much more common in sort of conversational situations, or maybe an informal letter to a friend. And it's plus. Plus, so it's literally giving or signaling that you're giving additional information. So the example, we can go bowling on Thursday night. It's great fun. Plus, they offer a student discount. So this may be a letter to a friend, but you can see you're really emphasizing extra information, additional information, in this case very positive. You're getting a student discount, which is never bad, right? Okay, one more option for an alternative to and. It's not a word or a phrase, it's more like a structure. And it's the not only but also structure. And here you need to use inversion. Now, I've already made videos on inversion and the not only but also structure, so I won't go into detail about that now. But let's just look at a quick example. Not only are you a good listener, but also very patient. So you could just say you are a good listener and patient, but that doesn't have the same feeling, right? It doesn't have the same emphasis. So if you can use that structure in your exam, you would get some really nice extra marks, but in the right context, of course. But if you're not sure on how to use that structure, then check out this video where I go into a lot of detail all about it. And if you need more help with your Cambridge English exams, check out my online preparation courses. The link is in the description. See you soon for another video.